Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Winecast. I've had my hands full for the last several weeks getting ready for a certification exam, and I wasn't planning to release another cast for at least another week. But with the wildfires that have been raging in Northern California causing so much harm and destruction, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the state where I grew up and how much it and its wines mean to me. So I'm taking a break from my studies so I can put it down for California and its remarkable wine industry. It was great to prepare for this cast and to spend time thinking about California and California wine, but thinking alone isn't going to cut it when it comes to getting much-needed relief to those affected by the fires. So I want to encourage all of my listeners to do whatever they're able to make a difference, and to help make that easier, I've linked to a great article in the information section of this video from the LA Times with lots of advice on how you can help. So I hope you'll all check that out as well. So with that said, let's go to Cali. California's love affair with Vitis vinifera began in the mid-1700s with the arrival of that species of grape at the hands of Spanish missionaries, who planted it primarily as a source of sacramental wine for the chain of missions they were establishing up and down California. Things took a while to warm up, so to speak, because the grape that the Franciscan fathers who founded the missions brought with them was the Listan Prieto grape, that they also took with them to other parts of the Spanish Empire like Chile, where it was known as País, and that in California would come to be known as the Mission or Mission grape. Whatever name it goes by, it's justly credited as a dependable and productive workhorse of a grape, but it's never really received much praise for the quality of its wines. Things were looking up by the mid-1800s, though, as other more interesting cuttings of Vitis vinifera began making their way to the state, with many of them showing up thanks to the efforts of one Agustin Haraszthy, an immigrant scion of a noble Hungarian family. A huge viticultural enthusiast, he's been called the father of California viticulture, in fact, and quite possibly the original most interesting man in the world. Haraszthy imported cuttings to California from both the eastern seaboard of the United States and from Europe, mostly at his own expense, and found time in the midst of all this to found the first commercial winery in California in 1857, the Buena Vista Winery in Sonoma. He did all of this after a couple of productive stints in both Wisconsin and San Diego, and before he left California for Nicaragua to try his hand at sugar growing and rum production, and where he was possibly eaten by an alligator. Or not. Nobody knows. The body was never found. Hey, I said the dude was interesting. Haraszthy's importance to the development of California as a wine-producing region is hard to overstate, but ironically, he also may have contributed to one of the biggest crises that California wine faced, because it was at Buena Vista in the mid-1860s that phylloxera was first detected in California, probably hitching a ride on one of the many East Coast vines that Haraszthy brought out west. Thankfully, by the time that phylloxera really started spreading, the solution to the crisis, grafting, was well understood, and the California industry bounced back quickly, successfully, and to much renown. California had a much tougher time, though, with that 13-year nightmare of a bad idea, national prohibition, with the industry there severely hobbled and with only 140 wineries still up and running at the end of it, down from just over 700 before prohibition became law. What came after Prohibition? Well, that's a really long story filled with larger-than-life characters like Robert Mondavi and seminal events like the 1976 Paris tasting of California versus French wines. It's such a long and colorful story that even my best Reader's Digest efforts to cut it down to size failed miserably, and people in events like Mondavi and the Judgment of Paris will have to wait for another cast, or even better, for their own dedicated casts. For now, you can just know that it was a huge uphill struggle to get California to where it is today as a wine producer. And where is it today? Well, for starters, it's producing the majority of U.S. wine by a very large margin. According to the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau that keeps tabs on production every year, California is responsible for a full 85% of U.S. wine. But as I covered in my cast on American wine, that number is misleading because the Tax and Trade Bureau's figures represent not just grape wine, but wine made from other fruits or agricultural products. And some informal estimates suggest that if you only considered grape wine, then the percentage goes up to around 88% of all wine, and maybe even higher to around 90% if you just consider wine made from Vitis vinifera and not from American native grapes or hybrids. In fact, California's production is so large that if it were its own country, it would still rank as the fourth largest wine producer in the world behind France, Italy, and Spain, and it would still have a wine economy just a little bit larger than Australia's. As far as wine law goes, California follows the U.S. system of appellations that's actually a hybrid system, allowing for appellations based on either state and county names or based on the later system of American viticultural areas, or AVAs. Even though it doesn't regulate much in terms of grape growing and wine production, the U.S. system is still surprisingly intricate, and if you want more information on it, you should check out my cast on American viticultural areas, which covers AVAs as well as the state and county appellation system. Speaking of AVAs, California is home to most of them, with the Golden State at the time of this cast hosting 138 of the United States' 239 AVAs. How did California become this important to U.S. wine? There are a lot of reasons, but two of the most important ones are geography and climate. If you remember the cast on wine and latitude, you'll know that though a wine region's location north or south of the equator is important, latitude isn't the whole story, and California is a textbook example of this. See, most of California's vineyards are located between 40 degrees north and 33 degrees south latitude. That's actually pretty far south as northern hemisphere wine-producing regions go. It's farther south than anything in France, and the north end of that zone is about where Naples, Italy, and Madrid, Spain are, and the south end is right around Beirut, Lebanon. And like these areas, though not necessarily like other areas at this latitude, the coastal parts of California are blessed with a very warm to hot Mediterranean climate. The problem is that relatively few of the state's vineyards are right on the coast. Instead, they're inland, separated from the sea by the north-south running mountain ranges that make drives up and down the California coast so spectacular. The separation from the ocean would normally make for a much hotter continental climate where only the hardiest of warm climate grapes could thrive. But California is also blessed with a very cold current, the creatively named California Current that flows south along its coast. This current not only moderates temperatures along the coast, but thanks to a series of gaps in the mountains, the cool air from the current is pulled inland, bringing temperatures down and otherwise affecting the local climate to allow for a very wide variety of grapes to grow throughout California. These gaps include the Petaluma Gap in Sonoma County that has a powerful effect on the climate of the Russian River Valley, and that helps make it a great place to grow Pinot Noir. The San Francisco Bay that pulls cool air toward the interior of Northern California, and the Sierra foothills. The north end of the San Francisco Bay, the San Pablo Bay, that makes Pinot and Chardonnay production work at the southern end of Napa Valley, as well as other major gaps in Monterey and Santa Barbara counties that allow quality production of cooler climate grapes. Also, all of these mountains and foothills associated with them means a lot of opportunities to plant at different elevations, and that helps make different growing areas capable of supporting a wider range of grapes. So California really is remarkable for the diversity of the climates and terroirs that it offers to grape growers and winemakers, and its situation for making great wines in the U.S. could be described as unique. So where are all these remarkable grapes? Most of California's 138 AVAs are located within 5 of what have come to be called super AVAs: the North Coast, San Francisco Bay, Sierra Foothills, Central Coast, and South Coast AVAs. These so-called super AVAs are not particularly homogeneous when it comes to terroir and climate. In fact, there's a good argument to be made that they were created primarily to allow large-scale wine producers the opportunity to source grapes from vineyards that they own across a wide area and still be able to attach an AVA designation and an estate-grown designation to the wines they make from them. But they do give you a good idea of where most of California's quality vineyard sites lie, and, no surprise, these sites are all in areas that are, to some degree, affected by the moderating influence of the California current, either directly or thanks to gaps in the mountains, or that take advantage of the altitude afforded by hillside and mountainous vineyard sites, or both. There is one other area that should be mentioned in connection with grape growing in California, and that's the Central Valley, which is not an AVA mostly because of its deep inland position, insulating it from the effects of cool sea air, and its low altitude making it a less than prime spot for quality grape growing. Instead, it's a great spot for growing lots and lots of grapes that don't necessarily benefit from the hot, dry climate. There are very literally hundreds of thousands of acres of grapes here, and the wines made from these grapes often end up as part of inexpensive large-format jug wines that don't do much to benefit California's reputation as a wine producer. However, there are a few spots, particularly at the north end of the Central Valley, that can produce great grapes. most notably the Lodi AVA and its sub-AVAs that are home to some really excellent Zinfandel and Petit Syrah. California's wine industry takes advantage of hundreds of available varietals, the top 7 of which are Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, and Zinfandel. But as with any large, complex wine region, it's best to think regionally to get a sense of what the state's strengths are. The North Coast is home to both Napa Valley and Sonoma County, with Napa famous for its Cabernet and Merlot, both as single varietals and in blends. But thanks to the cooling fog and breezes coming up from the San Pablo Bay, Napa can also grow great Chardonnay and Pinot, particularly in its Carneros sub-AVA that it shares with Sonoma. Speaking of Sonoma, it's well known for its Pinots and Chards too, and for the sparkling wines that can be made from them, but it's also a home for well-respected Syrah and Sauvignon Blanc, and Petit Syrah from Napa can be out of sight. The Sierra foothills that benefit from both cool air via the San Francisco Bay and from relatively high elevation are home to a fair amount of Zinfandel, but it also grows fine Cab and Syrah, and it's home to a lot of interesting plantings of Italian varietals like Barbera. And the Central Coast is home to a big chunk of California's Chardonnay plantings, along with well-regarded Pinots and, more recently, Rhone varietals like Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre. And that's just the beginning of what there is to explore in California. There's so much to explore, in fact, that some advice on styles to sample might be helpful, so here's what I got. First off, California made its modern reputation on single varietal wines featuring international grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir, among a host of others. Single varietal wines like these from California tend to be big affairs with lots of alcohol and extraction, and that often feature aggressive oak treatments, especially among the Cabs and Chards, though the best of them will still always have excellent balance. This is a great place to start, and don't shy away from blends either, especially the Meritage or Bordeaux-style blends that are also a California hallmark. And while big gnarly reds and whites are totally a California thing to be aware of, you should also note that that hasn't always been the case, and there's even a movement afoot that emphasizes wines with lower alcohol and higher acid profiles that are more in keeping with the kind of wines that were coming out of the Golden State up through the 1970s before everyone started assuming that bigger was necessarily better. So much for the heavy hitters made from international varieties, but keep an eye out as well for some more recent trends, like the great Rhone-styled wines that are coming out of different parts of the state, but especially from the south-central coast. California is home to the endearingly named Rhone Rangers, a group that's been doing a lot to promote Rhone-style blends and single varietal wines throughout the U.S. and abroad, and their efforts have been paying off with more and more producers making more and more excellent wines in the key of R. California is also home to a bunch of older plantings of Italian varietals, especially Sangiovese and Barbera, but with Montepulciano and a bunch of others in the mix as well. Some of these plantings go back to a wave of interest in producing Italian-styled wines in California called the Cal-Ital movement that hit its peak in the 1980s as producers, especially innovative ones like Robert Mondavi, were looking to make something different than the usual Bordeaux-styled reds. And while the initial movement lost steam after the 80s, a lot of those plantings are still there, and there's renewed interest in crafting something really special from them. And finally, don't forget to spend some time checking out that vast quilt of styles and grapes that can only be thought of as quintessentially California. Like powerful and often oak-treated Sauvignon Blanc, dusty Petit Syrah brimming over with chocolate and blueberries, big honkin' Zinfandels, and mystery wines made as field blends from old vineyards with a hodgepodge of different grapes all mixed together, like they did it back in the day before single varietals were king. I don't normally recommend individual producers on these casts, but I'll cut my home state a special deal. And just note that any of the wines that I just flashed before you are from personal favorite producers that I've found to be incredibly dependable. Thanks for joining me for another Winecast. I really do hope to return to California as a subject and do an appropriately thorough treatment of its history and its contribution to world wine culture. But meanwhile, I hope this cast has given you some insight into what makes California special. And at a more personal level, I hope it got you thinking of California and what you can do to help during this very bad time. Thanks as always for watching and otherwise supporting this channel. I'm very much looking forward to getting back into the full swing of regular weekly casts once I'm done with my exam, so thanks for sticking with me and my channel while I've been busy. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.